In our last conversation, we talked about the headline act, the legumes, nature's nitrogen fixers. But any good farmer, ancient or modern, will tell you that a one-plant show doesn't make for a healthy farm. It's the supporting cast that really makes the system work. So let's pull back the curtain on the other botanical workhorses our ancestors relied on. These weren't always grown for a direct harvest of grain or fruit. Their job was more subtle and in many ways more vital. They were grown for the soil itself. They were the original cover crops, green manures, and ecological engineers. Let's start with a concept every ancient farmer battling weeds understood. A bare field is a troubled field. Leave soil exposed to sun, wind, and rain, and it will bake, blow away, wash off, or be immediately colonized by plants you don't want. The solution? Cover it with plants you do want, or at least can control. This is where fast-growing, dense grasses and grains come into play. Take rye, for instance. Medieval European farmers, especially in colder climates, valued it not just for its hardiness as a bread grain, but for its role as a sentinel. They would sow rye in the autumn on a harvested field. While other crops slept, rye grew, establishing a vigorous root mat that held the soil fast against winter rains and winds. Come spring, it could be plowed under while still green, where it would decompose and add a generous helping of organic matter to the soil, a practice known as green manuring. It was like tucking the earth in with a blanket of living roots for the winter, a blanket you then recycled into breakfast for next season's crops. The Romans knew a version of this too, using fast-growing forage crops like lupins, a legume, yes, but one prized more for biomass than beans, to be plowed under. Pliny the Elder wrote about it, noting it enriched the soil. The man was a fan. Then there's the brilliant use of buckwheat. Now, this is a fascinating character. It's not a cereal grass, nor a legume. It's related to rhubarb, of all things. But its superpower is speed. An old agricultural saying from Eastern Europe and parts of Asia went something like, "Buckwheat can be sown when you hear the cuckoo and harvested when you hear him again." It grows incredibly fast, creating a dense, smothering canopy that shades out weeds with ruthless efficiency. But its real gift to tired soil is its ability to mobilize phosphorus. Buckwheat roots exude acids that can unlock phosphorus bound up in soil minerals, making it available for itself and, crucially, for the crops that follow. Ancient farmers noticed that after buckwheat, other plants just seemed to thrive better. They didn't know the chemistry, but they saw the result. Buckwheat was a great prep cook for the field, getting the nutrients ready for the main course. This brings us to a less glamorous but utterly critical task: breaking up hardpan. Over time, soil can become compacted, especially under the feet of livestock or the weight of tradition. Water can't penetrate, roots can't delve. The ancient solution? Plants with taproots that act like living crowbars. The daikon radish, or fodder radish, is a classic example from East Asian agriculture. Grown not primarily for its edible root, but as a soil conditioner, its thick, white taproot can drive several feet into the ground, physically fracturing compacted layers. When the plant dies over winter, the root decays, leaving behind a network of deep organic channels that improve drainage and aeration. It's like giving the soil a deep tissue massage and a set of breathing tubes. Similarly, in the Mediterranean, plants like sweet clover, another legume with a tough root, were used for this purpose. The Romans, ever the systematic engineers, documented the use of deep-rooted alfalfa to improve subsoil structure. They understood that what happened down below was just as important as what happened on the surface. But the ancient farmer's toolbox wasn't just about specific species, it was about timing and synergy. They practiced what we'd now call sequential planting or relay cropping. A fast-growing cover like buckwheat might be sown immediately after a spring harvest. It would grow for 6 or 8 weeks, suppressing weeds and adding organic matter, then be turned under just in time to plant a winter grain like rye or wheat. The rye would then protect the field over winter. In spring, it might be grazed by livestock, who would add manure, then plowed under to feed a summer crop like millet or beans. This created a near-continuous living cover, a constant cycle of growth, protection, and soil feeding. It was a sophisticated, multi-layered calendar of plant interactions, all designed to keep the soil busy, protected, and fertile. All of this clever planting wasn't just about physical structure or adding green stuff to the dirt, though. The real magic, the hidden orchestra, was happening in the soil food web. Ancient farmers were fostering an entire ecosystem they couldn't even see. When they plowed under a green cover crop like rye or vetch, they weren't just adding organic matter. They were delivering a feast. That fresh, succulent plant material is like fine dining for soil bacteria and fungi. These microbes multiply explosively to consume it. In doing so, they convert the plant nutrients into their own bodies. Then, tiny predators, nematodes, protozoa, come to eat the bacteria. And what do they leave behind? Nutrients in a form plant roots can easily absorb. This process, called the microbial loop, is nature's perfect fertilizer factory. By constantly adding diverse plant residues, ancient farmers were keeping this underground economy thriving. They were managing the workforce that actually runs the farm. This also connects to the fascinating world of mycorrhizal fungi. These are fungi that form symbiotic partnerships with most plants, including many cover crops. They attach to plant roots and extend far out into the soil, acting like a gigantic, superfine root network. They gather water and nutrients, especially phosphorus, and trade them to the plant for sugars. When a cover crop is terminated, that vast fungal network doesn't immediately die. It can actually connect to the roots of the next crop, giving it a massive head start, a kind of underground inheritance. Farmers who rotated crops wisely were, without knowing it, cultivating and preserving this beneficial fungal infrastructure. Beyond biology, there was also a deep understanding of water and microclimate. A living cover of plants acts like a buffer. It reduces evaporation from the soil surface, keeping moisture in. The plant canopy breaks the force of raindrops, preventing the soil surface from sealing into a hard crust, a major cause of runoff and erosion. On a hillside in ancient China or the Andes, this wasn't just a good idea. It was the difference between keeping your farm and watching it wash down the valley. The cover crop was the land's first and best line of defense against the weather. So we have all these brilliant practices: fast covers for protection, deep roots for drilling, green manures for feeding microbes, and clever sequences for continuous care. It paints a picture of a sophisticated, place-based knowledge system. This wasn't a one-size-fits-all technology exported from an empire's capital. It was a set of principles adapted to local conditions over centuries. The right plant for the right job in the right place. Buckwheat in the short summers of the north. Daikon radish in the compacted rice paddy margins. Lupins on the sandy soils of the Mediterranean coast. This leads to the inevitable, somewhat frustrating question. If it was so brilliant, why did it largely fade away? The answer, as with many things, comes down to economics and a shift in perspective. The Industrial Revolution and the rise of synthetic fertilizers in the 20th century changed the equation. Fertilizer offered a seemingly simple, immediate, and less labor-intensive solution. Why spend months growing a crop you won't harvest just to feed the soil when you can buy a bag of granules that does the job instantly? Agriculture began to be viewed more as an industrial input-output system and less as a managed ecosystem. The slow, complex wisdom of the cover crop was sidelined in favor of speed and simplification. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. The bag of granules feeds the plant, but it doesn't feed the soil. It doesn't build organic matter, improve structure, or support that vast microbial and fungal workforce. Over time, this leads to what we now call functional land degradation. The soil becomes merely a physical medium to hold plants upright while we pour on inputs. It loses its resilience, its ability to hold water, its innate fertility. It becomes addicted, and we become the dealers. This is precisely why there's a powerful movement today to relearn this ancient syllabus. Modern regenerative agriculture is, in essence, a science-backed rediscovery of these old principles. We now have the tools to measure soil carbon, map fungal networks, and quantify water infiltration. And what does that data tell us? It validates the old ways. It shows that a diverse cover crop mix does increase microbial activity, that deep taproots do improve yields in subsequent crops, that keeping the soil covered is the best defense against drought and deluge. The ancient farmers were master-applied ecologists. They didn't have our technology, but they had something we risked losing: patience, observation, and a holistic view of the farm as a living, interconnected whole. They knew you couldn't cheat the system in the long run. You had to invest in the soil's health season after season with the right botanical tools. In the end, these supporting cast crops are a testament to a profound historical truth. True sustainability isn't about a single miracle solution. It's about assembling a diverse, resilient team where each member plays a crucial role. The legumes fix nitrogen, the grasses protect and add bulk, the deep roots mine and aerate, and the entire ensemble feeds the hidden universe below. It's a lesson in cooperation, timing, and working with nature's genius. A lesson we learned over millennia, forgot for a century, and are now urgently and hopefully relearning. Which of these supporting strategies, the use of fast-growing grasses for protection, deep-rooted plants for drilling, or the fostering of the microbial world, do you think represents the most overlooked piece of the agricultural puzzle, both historically and today? Share your insights in the comments below.